This is the most photographed mountain range in North America. Look at it long enough, and it stops feeling like a postcard and starts feeling like a warning. For generations, people came here to take what the mountains were holding. They built towns out of nothing. Raised families in the cold, and went down into the rock to dig out the wealth that helped build a nation. Many never came back up. Long before any of them arrived, this land already had its own people. And they knew it was never as gentle as it looked. Because these mountains take things, they have come down on entire towns in seconds. They swallow water that never returns. And they are still doing it today. Quietly. Behind the most beautiful view on the continent. Hidden among the bright lakes and the photographs are drowned neighbourhoods. Abandoned mines. Sealed tunnels. And quiet graves the tourists drive straight past. This is the Canadian Rockies. If it can drown one town and erase another without a trace, what else is down there that no one has found yet? The Canadian Rockies are where most people picture when they think of Canada, and Banff National Park sits right at the centre of that. That same railway that opened this valley built the town to serve train passengers, not settlers. "6 million visitors a year crowded the wildlife, so elk and bears began wandering into town just to get around the people. Engineers answered with the world's largest set of wildlife overpasses, green bridges that wolves, grizzlies and cougars now use more than most hiking trails. Those bridges worked almost too well, and grizzlies now cross so often they have moved back into valleys they had left for years. Higher up the valley, the Athabasca Glacier takes over the ground, its old edges marked by stakes driven into bare rock. The easiest glacier to reach on the continent sits right beside the road, and that easy access is both its draw and its danger. Hidden cracks have swallowed tourists who left the marked path, and one skier recently dropped 65 feet into one with no warning. The ice itself moves forward a few inches a day, slow enough to ignore, but fast enough that the surface under your feet was somewhere else last week. Meltwater here drains toward 3 different oceans, one of the few spots on Earth where a single drop has to pick a continent. It loses about 16 feet of length a year and has thinned roughly 200 feet since the 1960s, so the old edge markers now sit far out on bare rock. In the rocky slopes just above the ice, the hoary marmot watches the whole retreat and warns everything nearby. The largest marmot on the continent runs its whole life on noise. It eats almost non-stop through summer to fatten up for nearly 8 months asleep underground. Different threats get different whistles, and every animal on the slope reacts to each call. When a golden eagle appears, that alarm sweeps across the rocks before the bird even starts its dive. One marmot on a good rock guards every animal nearby, whether they asked for it or not. Sharing those same rocks is the pika, a neighbour running out of mountain to climb. This tiny relative of the rabbit never hibernates, and that one choice shapes its whole life. All summer it cuts and dries grass under the rocks, building a hay pile big enough to last the winter. A temperature most animals find mild can kill it, so it stays close to the cool air trapped between the stones. As the mountain warms, it climbs higher, but the top is running out, and some groups have already vanished, with no predator to blame. The Banff Springs Hotel was built on the same mountains and has never had that problem with crowds. A Scottish-style castle in the middle of the mountains stops every first-time visitor cold. Workers built the first one back to front, finishing before anyone noticed that the best views faced the wrong way, a very costly mistake. It is also called one of the most haunted buildings in the Rockies, with a bride in a wedding dress reported on the staircase for decades. At 764 rooms, it remains one of the largest hotels ever built in the Canadian Rockies, and its towers are still the first thing most visitors photograph from the valley floor. It all traces back to the cave and basin nearby, where a fight over a small hot spring did not just build a hotel, it created a national park system. Three railway workers found the spring by dropping through a hole in the rock, and the fight over the water grew messy enough that the government wrote laws protecting wild land across the country. Indigenous peoples had come here for healing, long before any railway, so it was less a discovery than a return with a property dispute attached. The warm water also built something no one planned, a tiny world of heat-loving snails found almost nowhere else, living in the runoff right beside the path. From this small spring, the scale jumps to Lake Minnewanka, big enough to swallow a whole town and still hide it underwater today. The largest lake in the park keeps a secret most visitors never look for. A flooded town still lies on the bottom, streets, foundations and staircases left exactly where they stood when the dam raised the water. Divers explore it often, making this one of the only places in the Rockies where you can swim over a sunken neighbourhood. The Stony Nakoda called it the Lake of the Water Spirit long before the dam, and the name fit better than anyone meant it to. A few miles on, that same erasure repeats at Bankhead, where over 1,000 people once lived and only concrete foundations remain. This coal town wasn't simply abandoned, it was taken apart on purpose. It had power and sewers before Banff did, Yet after a strike shut the mine, the company lifted the houses off their foundations and hauled them away one by one. All that stayed behind were concrete slabs, rusting machines, and sealed tunnels still running under the mountain. Church, school, and homes vanished in barely 20 years, wiped from the map on purpose. Running through all this empty ground is the Bow Valley, the corridor that shaped this place longer than any mine or hotel. Glacial melt off the high ice has cut this whole valley for thousands of years. It begins at Bow Lake and drops over Bow Falls at the edge of town, a waterfall so easy to reach that early tourists picnicked beside it, missing how strong the current was. The turquoise colour isn't algae, but rock flour, fine glacial powder floating in the water that scatters light and makes the river look unreal. From there it runs 365 miles east across the plains, giving drinking water to over 1 million people who never see where it starts. In winter the valley funnels cold air down from the peaks, forcing wildlife to move, adapt, or find shelter fast. Cut into the side of the same valley is Johnston Canyon, so tight the only way to its falls is to walk straight in. A side creek cuts straight down through solid limestone, leaving a slot so narrow you can touch both walls at once. No flood or earthquake did it, just steady water grinding the same line and dropping nearly 100 feet by the upper falls. The walkways are bolted into the canyon wall and hang over the creek, so you walk above the water, not beside it. Cold air trapped between the walls keeps it colder than outside, and ice clings to the rock well into summer. In winter, the falls freeze solid and fill with ice climbers, driving picks into frozen water, a short drive from a hotel lobby. Past these walls, the valley opens onto Lake Louise, a glacial pool so turquoise it looks painted. First-time visitors wonder if the water was changed for photos. The colour runs so bright. It comes from the Victoria Glacier grinding rock into powder that washes in and bends the light like no filter can. At over 5,600 feet, the lake stays frozen more than half the year, yet the hotel behind it was built for tourists before anyone thought hard about the winters. That hotel has watched the glacier shrink since it opened, so guests today see ice clearly smaller than the first visitors did. Over 1 million people arrive by one road each year, jamming it so badly that the park now bans private cars and runs shuttles. Behind a nearby ridge sits Moraine Lake, so famous it ended up printed on a nation's money. Most people can't actually find this lake until they're standing in front of it. Ten summits ring the basin in the Valley of the 10 Peaks, fed by the most traffic-choked parking lot in the park. It isn't glacier-fed the way most assume, since a huge rock pile from an old collapse blocks the basin and it fills with snowmelt alone. The turquoise peaks in June and fades by August, so most visitors see a different lake than the one on the bill. Crowds once grew so large that emergency trucks couldn't get through, forcing a private car ban on the road every summer. Higher up sits Peyto Lake, shaped like a wolf's head from above and blue enough to stop hikers cold. From Bow Summit, the highest point you can drive to in the Rockies, that wolf's head shape stares right back up. The lake stays frozen well into June, and the blue peaks just after the ice breaks, a window of only a few weeks before the colour shifts. It carries the name of a guide so private, he reportedly slipped away from his own retirement party to live alone in the mountains. From the summit, the tree line drops sharply below, and the lake sits in a bowl so clean it looks designed, not natural. In the forest just below, the Clark's nutcracker is quietly holding the whole high forest together. This grey and black bird hides up to 30,000 seeds across the forest each season and remembers where most of them sit, buried under months of snow. The whitebark pine can't spread its own seeds and depends almost fully on this one bird to plant the next forest. It doesn't do this out of kindness, since the trees that sprout are just the result of a memory that sometimes slips. A few forgotten seed piles a year are enough to keep whole groves alive. The wolverine stores nothing, yet still outlasts everything else on the ridge. It roams up to 30 miles a day across the highest, coldest ridges, holding a range far too big for its size. Pound for pound, it can drive a bear off a kill, not with strength, but by simply refusing to back down. Up here, it eats whatever the mountains give: frozen meat, buried bones, even animals killed by avalanches and dug out of packed snow. Hard snow and thin air push most hunters away, but this one turns those same conditions into cover from rivals. Most researchers spend whole careers in these peaks without seeing it, always a step ahead of every tracker. The Columbia Icefield has been driving these same brutal conditions far longer than any creature has been crossing them. This sheet of ice is large enough to feed rivers that end in 3 different oceans. Snow here doesn't just melt, it piles up, presses into blue ice, then slides downhill like a slow conveyor, carrying water to far-off towns. Cracks can open without warning and swallow machines whole, so guides read the flat white surface the way sailors read rough seas. The ice is thinning fast now, with rock markers showing how far it has pulled back in one lifetime. From its shrinking edge, the skyline climbs to Mount Robson, so often wrapped in cloud that locals say it chooses who gets to see it. The highest peak in the Canadian Rockies goes missing from its own postcards because it hides in its own cloud. Hikers can stand in clear sun at the base, while the summit sits in a storm they never see, and many trips end staring at blank fog. Up here the wind acts like a guard, throwing loose rock and ice down steep faces and deciding which routes stay open. Even famous paths feel temporary, since one slide or broken snow bridge can wipe out a line that looked solid yesterday. Canmore was built on the same logic. Coal first, then the mountains took over everything else. This town once shipped coal out and now brings hikers and skiers in. Old mine roads and rail lines are bike and walking paths now, so people exercise on the very routes that once carried ore. The daily rhythm flipped too, shift whistles and coal dust traded for early coffee and fresh buns timed to the morning ski rush. Many people move here so work fits around snow, rock and river, squeezing meetings between ski runs. Over all of it stand the Three Sisters, 3 sharp peaks marking the skyline and the next stop deeper into the Rockies. These peaks rise in a row so clear that drivers spot them from the highway long before the town. Each summit is hard quartzite that wears down slower than the softer rock around it, which is why they stay sharp, while nearby cliffs go round. For the stony Nakoda, the shapes of Three Sisters turn to stone, left to watch the valley below. That mix of rock and story runs so strong that locals read the weather and light by how the sisters sit against the sky. Just below them, the same cliffs hang over grassy lakes, where old rock paintings show people read this skyline long before the town existed. Two bright turquoise pools open up as the trail bends, clear enough to count stones on the bottom from the bank. Springs filtered through limestone feed them from underground, loading the water with minerals that twist the light into an unreal blue-green. On the rock above, faint paintings mark the cliffs, simple shapes left by people who paused here long before any trail was cut. Standing by these small painted lakes, you start to see why a single word for ore was later chosen to name Yoho, a whole valley to the west. The word means amazement in Cree, picked before any roads or trails reached the place. Sharp peaks, quiet icefields and fossil beds sit side by side, holding some of the strangest early creatures ever found in stone. Trains once fought these slopes so hard that engineers cut spiral tunnels inside the mountains just to stop heavy cars sliding back. Water runs huge here too. Glaciers pouring melt each summer. Rivers cutting tight canyons. Falls roaring loud enough to hear minutes before you see them. Follow one of those booming sounds up a side valley to Takakau Falls, a white plume dropping so far it looks like it falls out of the sky. The first thing you meet is noise, steady thunder long before any water shows. Step out of the trees, and a white torrent drops like a tower from the daily glacier, hitting rocks so hard the spray blows sideways. At the base, faint shakes run through the ground, as thin strands peel off in the air and turn to mist before reaching the pool. All of it comes from one glacier above, melting with the seasons, throwing its extra water straight over the cliff. Downstream, the same water meets the natural bridge. The Kicking Horse River drilled a tunnel clean through one block of stone, so you stand on a bridge while the river roars under your boots. In high water, that narrow gap swallows whole logs and boulders, shaking the rock and wearing the bridge away from the inside. The strange part is how calm it looks from above, even though one slip toward the edge drops into a channel no one escapes. A short way on, the same channel widens into the flat green of Emerald Lake. The water sits so green that many visitors assume the colour can't be real. Rock flour, ground fine by the ice and left floating, bends the light so much that even faint cloud reflections turn green. Walk the shore and the colour flips fast, almost neon in full sun, then dull grey the moment a cloud crosses the valley. This calm stretch is only a pause, since the same Kicking Horse soon throws itself over the wide ledge at Wapta Falls. Here the river tightens and pours over a wide limestone ledge in one solid sheet, wider than it is tall. Instead of a narrow drop, it hits as a wall of sound and spray, the whole river falling at once so the ground hums underfoot. Up close you can watch it rework the valley, piling shifting mounds of sand and rock at the base that change every high water season. Beside all that power, small rocky pockets along the edge turn calm enough for a very picky duck to rest. Downstream in those rough channels rides the harlequin duck, diving between boulders where most water birds won't even land. It treats the white water like a playground, riding the force instead of fleeing it. Built like a tiny river surfer, it carries heavy bones to stay low in the current and uses strong legs to drive into dives. Even its webbed feet have small claws, gripping bare rock where most birds would be swept away in seconds. It prefers roaring glacial rivers to calm ponds, raising chicks beside the rapids and feeding in the foam. When the season ends, it slips toward the coast, following the same hard water on into Crowsnest Pass, where people once gambled their lives on coal. Five coal towns went up in this one valley inside a single decade, all built for the same buried seam. The plan was simple: dig the coal out, load it up, and ship it east. Some towns sat so close together that residents genuinely argued over which one they actually lived in. The work pulled in Ukrainians, Italians, and Croatians, each group bringing its own language and cooking into a remote mountain pass. When the coal ran out, the people stayed, so pierogi counters, an old church hall still run in these towns today. The mine buildings were never torn down, just left where they stood on the afternoon the work stopped. The deadliest morning belongs to the Frank Slide. Turtle Mountain dropped off its east face in roughly 90 seconds. The rock crossed the whole valley and climbed the slope on the far side, nearly catching a train whose crew escaped by seconds. Miners trapped below ground dug themselves out alive, while many people asleep in homes above never had a chance. The boulder field still covers around 3 square miles, every rock sitting where it stopped. Geologists watch the same crack widen today, the next failure already studied at the ruins of Leitch Collieries. The only fully Canadian-owned mine in the pass was built without foreign money and meant to outlast all the rest. It still shut down in under a decade, leaving the coke ovens, powerhouse and tipple right where workers abandoned them. The manager's house surprises people, built like a real family home, because the owners truly believed the place would run for generations. Every wall and archway is still upright, stopped mid-sentence as if someone meant to come back. That same faith drove the next operation too, where a French company shipped its oven bricks straight from Belgium to the village of Lille. A fully planned French town went up here from scratch, certain it would put down roots in a foreign valley. "50 coke ovens tell the whole story, built from bricks numbered and shipped from Belgium, because the operators refused to trust local material. The town vanished within a decade, not from disaster, but from bad coal and worse timing, leaving those Belgian bricks as the only proof it stood. Big ambition and sudden silence ran through every camp here, though nowhere turned deadly like Hillcrest mines. A gas explosion tore through the mine before the morning shift had fully started, killing 189 men in minutes. It struck twice, the second blast hitting the rescue teams who rushed in after the first. Most victims were buried together in mass graves on the hillside above town. Too many bodies for too few days. The mine reopened anyway because there was no other way to make a living. The same hard bargain you still feel underground at Bellevue. Visitors here walk the exact tunnels miners used for nearly 60 years. Step inside and the temperature drops. The walls press closer, and a helmet lamp becomes the only light. No major explosion ever hit this mine, yet every worker dug knowing what had happened to their neighbours at Hillcrest just miles away. Original wooden supports still hold the mountain back, timber doing its job underground for over a century. Daylight is a shock after the dark shaft, the open air above ground belonging now to the Calliope hummingbird. The tiniest bird on the continent breeds in this pass after flying over 9,000 miles to reach it. It weighs less than a ping-pong ball, hovers at eye level completely unbothered, then heads south toward the strange winter ice of Abraham Lake. This lake looks completely natural, but was flooded into existence by a dam in the 1970s. In summer it reads as just another turquoise reservoir, yet winter stacks white discs of trapped methane under the ice. Those bubbles are flammable, so a hole punched above one can actually be lit on fire. Cold water pushing in from the Bighorn River freezes the surface unevenly, locking the bubbles into clean stacks. Photographers drive hours through brutal cold to lie flat and shoot straight down, on a lake too dangerous to stand on in the exact weather worth visiting for. The full size of it only shows from above at Windy Point Ridge. The reservoir, the dam, and the peaks all line up at once from this one high spot. Wind funnels down the valley hard enough to shove a person sideways, which makes the place as known for the gusts as the view. Calm follows the wind west into Kootenay National Park, where the rock turns deep red. Most people drive straight through this park, which is exactly why it stays the least visited of the 4 mountain parks. It sits where wet Pacific air collides with dry eastern cold, so cactus and glaciers somehow exist inside one boundary. A wildfire ripped through a large section not long ago and pulled wildlife back in numbers that surprised the park's own researchers. The red rock isn't a coating, it's iron pushed up to the surface by the same fault that built these mountains. Indigenous peoples gathered that iron pigment for generations at the paint pots. Cold mineral springs bubble up through the ground here, staining everything around them orange and red. People travelled from across the continent for this pigment, using it for ceremonies and sacred markings. A European company once tried to mine the deposits, hauled in equipment, built a small plant, then walked away within a few years. The trail drops from this rust-coloured ground into Marble Canyon. Glacial meltwater has cut over 130 feet, straight down into the pale limestone here. The turquoise colour comes from fine glacial sediment scattering the light, the water cold and fast under the footbridges above it. The gorge keeps getting deeper because the water has never stopped working. Look up instead of down, and a long, unbroken cliff runs the length of the park, the rock wall. A single limestone cliff runs nearly 20 miles along the park's spine, so even it looks deliberately built. It rises in one sheer wall, yet the trail at its base is one of the more walkable, multi-day routes in the Rockies. The true scale only lands when you look up and can't find the top. Nothing proves these mountains stopped being a backdrop better than Mount Assiniboine. A near-perfect rock pyramid rises here with no road, no gondola, and no shortcut. You reach it by helicopter or earn it on a 2-day hike. At 11,870 feet, its four faces climb so evenly that early climbers genuinely mistook it for a volcano. Clouds form around the summit, on otherwise clear days, turning back more climbers than almost any peak in the Rockies. Builders flew the lodge at its base in piece by piece, with no other way to put it there. That hard-won isolation ends at Waterton Lakes. This is the only place on Earth where open prairie meets the Rockies with no foothills and no warning. A massive slab of rock slid eastward over much younger rock, shoving the mountains right to the edge of the plains. Gusts here regularly hit 105 miles per hour, strong enough to flip camper vans, which has actually happened. Upper Waterton Lake is the deepest in the Rockies, sunk into a park barely bigger than a small town. All that wind and exposure strips the ground bare, revealing colours that run deepest at Red Rock Canyon. Billion-year-old red rock lies sliced open here by a single creek into smooth stone chutes. Iron rusted right through the stone, so the walls can even leave pink on your fingers if you drag a hand along them. Water runs clear over sharp bands of red, green and purple, the layers so cleanly split they look painted on. Those coloured bands run up onto the open ridges above, ideal launch ramps for the ferruginous hawk. The largest hawk on the continent uses these high ridges to launch out over the prairie without a single flap. It picks exposed slopes most birds avoid, using the wide view to spot ground squirrels far below. A dive comes so fast the prey never looks up. Where these hunters thin out, burrowing animals boom and the short grass shifts with them. One low flight toward town runs straight to Cameron Falls. Heavy rain can turn this waterfall brick red, coloured by loose sediment, washed off the hills above. Rock over 1 billion years old lines the drop, old enough to touch from the path. Within hours the creek often clears again, as if nothing strange just poured through town. That same creek runs down to the lakeshore below the Prince of Wales Hotel. It stands high on a bare ridge above the lake, exposed to every storm. On the strongest days, guests can feel the whole building quietly move. Builders chose the spot so people could watch storms roll off the prairie and crash into the mountains. That same wild wind belongs to a bird built for this edge, the prairie falcon. It launches off the cliff edge and rides the gusts like a built-in engine over the grass. The nest tucks onto bare rock where cliffs meet fields, letting the adults drop straight into a high-speed hunt. That low, fast hunting flight runs out over the flats toward Jasper National Park. This is the largest national park in the Canadian Rockies, 10 times the size of Banff. One small town sits in the middle, and almost everything else is left wild. Roads end early on purpose, so whole valleys are reachable only on foot, skis, or by paddle. It's also a dark sky park, where low lights leave the Milky Way clear overhead. Hot springs, icefields and high passes all drain into the Athabasca River, which gathers speed until it hits the rock walls of Athabasca Falls. The river slams into a narrow rock throat here and hits hard enough to shake the ground underfoot. The drop isn't tall, but the force has drilled smooth potholes and side tunnels into the hard rock beside the paths. A few people have slipped into those polished pits and needed fast rescue before the current pulled them under. The cliffs keep changing as the water cuts them from below, opening new caves you can't see from above. In the cooler valleys beyond, one of the last woodland caribou herds moves through the old forest. fewer than 40 of these animals survive in the whole southern range. They actually rely on deep snow, using wide hooves to dig down to lichen, where other hoofed animals won't go. Their forest is failing in a new way, since wolves now follow packed elk trails straight into caribou ground. Each female raises just one calf, so a single bad year can wipe out nearly all the young. When caribou drop, the wider northern forest is usually in trouble too, the same slow loss waiting at Pocahontas. A coal town once stood inside the park here before the forest pulled it apart. House sites are just flat patches and half-buried steps now, though the soil still hides glass, rusted metal, and old stove pieces. Mine rock stayed behind when the people left, so wildflowers and spruce now push up through the slag. Sunwapta Falls sits at the end of the same valley, fed by ice rather than coal. Pure glacier runoff feeds this river, turned milky blue-grey by fine rock dust. It splits around a tiny island, then squeezes through a tight canyon loud enough in flood to drown out voices. Cloudier and greyer water means the glacier upstream is grinding away harder. Small chunks of ice drift past in the foam, fed off the high face of Mount Edith Cavell. Angel Glacier clings to the north face like a pair of huge wings. It drops ice into a small, bright pond below, so warm days break with sudden cracks and splashes. The Cavell Meadows Trail climbs to a clear view where short summers force wildflowers into a brief, intense bloom. Named for a nurse killed in wartime, the peak holds that story in total silence ever since. Ice melt off this face eventually finds its way into Maligne Canyon. This is the deepest canyon in the Canadian Rockies, so narrow you hear the river before you see it. Along some stretches, the water vanishes into the rock and runs underground, then bursts back out nearby. Winter slows and freezes the flow until the walls turn into hanging ice sheets and solid white falls. Small leaks freeze into blue arches and tunnels along the canyon floor. Once the cold holds, that frozen riverbed opens to walkers on the Maligne Canyon Ice Walk. People walk the frozen riverbed itself in winter, between ice walls instead of under a bridge. Water that hid underground all summer now hangs in plain sight as clear columns and blue arches. Guides read the surface and pick safe lines, so you can stand under frozen falls and touch ice that used to be spray. Out of that frozen hall, the valley widens toward long, cold Maligne Lake. This is the largest natural lake in the Canadian Rockies, a long sheet of cold glacial water ringed by peaks. Steep slopes drop straight in, leaving almost nowhere to put a road or a house. The farther a boat goes, the more the water feels claimed by something wilder. Many people stop at the first bend, even though the far end hides a sacred forested point called Spirit Island. A knob of rock barely larger than a tennis court holds one of the most photographed views on the planet. Long before cameras, the stony Nakoda called it sacred because from here several valleys line up at once. Most famous shots come from a small dock on the shore, so the island itself stays almost untouched. Medicine Lake sits up the same valley, and every autumn it performs a trick no other lake in the range can match. This lake empties itself almost completely every year. In late season, the water slips into cracks in the rocky floor until a wide basin lies nearly dry. The stony Nakoda called it the Lake of Evil Spirits because the water vanished without warning, and science simply calls it a disappearing lake. All that water keeps moving through hidden caves and seeps back out miles away in other streams. When only mud and tracks remain, the empty basin becomes hunting ground for the grey wolf. Five packs work the valleys of this park, crossing huge distances in near silence. They use dried lake beds and frozen rivers like walkways, padding for miles to save energy. After a kill, wolves often back off and let a grizzly eat first, then return to clean up the rest. By pulling elk and deer off the easy ground, they change where herds feed and where young trees survive. When a pack moves out, prey and smaller hunters move with it, the balance tipping across the whole valley. Above the tree line where wolves never go, the white-tailed ptarmigan holds its ground all year. Its feathers switch from brown to pure white, so winter nearly hides it in the snow beneath a passing hawk. Even its feet wear fluff like tiny snowshoes, letting it walk crusted snow and dig out frozen plants. In summer it blends into the rocks so well that hikers routinely step within a few feet before noticing it. One strip of pavement threads the peaks below its ridge, the Icefields Parkway. One road carries you past more peaks, canyons and ice than many whole countries hold. It runs about 145 miles through protected land, with glaciers and fresh rockfalls right beside the pavement. Even the fuel stops feel different, as drivers trade news of bears, goats and rock slides like traffic updates. Crews fight a constant battle against freeze, thaw and falling rock just to keep it open. One glacier along it lost a toe to melt and never grew it back, the Crowfoot Glacier. Three ice toes once hung down this cliff like a giant bird's foot. One has already melted away, so the name now fits something that no longer fully exists. Old photos line up against today's view to show how far the ice has pulled back. Its meltwater spills down cliffs that freeze each winter into tall, pale columns, forming the Weeping Wall. Water leaks out of nearly every crack in this high rock face. In warm months, dozens of thin streams slide down at once, so the whole cliff looks like it's crying. Winter hardens those trickles into thick ice columns, a frozen ladder that climbers line up to try. Cold air off the ice pushes down the valley and keeps working on the rock at Mistaya Canyon. A twisting trench of pale rock here is so tight that whole trees jam across it like toothpicks. Swirling water and stones have polished the limestone until the curves look almost poured. A small rise in flow flips quiet pools into fast funnels, far more dangerous than they look. Rock and cold water give way to open ground at Big Bend. A sweeping curve throws the whole valley open at once here. The corner sits so exposed that sound carries far, letting you hear ravens and rockfalls before they appear. Bighorn sheep come down to the gravel for road salt and a clear view of any wolves or bears below. Parker Ridge sits above the next pullout, where the view flips from valley floor to glacier surface. Most viewpoints here look up at ice, but this one looks down onto the Saskatchewan Glacier below. Wind hits the ridge so often that trees never take hold. The weather can flip from calm to harsh in minutes, with no shelter anywhere on the path. Down in the valley wetlands waits a far larger animal, the moose. The largest member of the deer family wades the shallow wetlands here like it owns the river. Long legs and wide hooves work like stilts and snowshoes, built to cross bog where heavy animals sink. That huge nose lets it dunk its head for plants and lift it again, still breathing easily. Living alone helps, since one giant can slip through willow thickets almost silently. Then it bursts into a sprint that shocks anyone who thought it looked slow. A calf copies its mother's safe crossings, because one wrong step in a cold channel means easy prey for wolves. Lower hills replace the marshes, and the land turns from wild rivers to a town built on coal, Nordegg. A whole town was sketched out as lines on a map before a single building went up. It grew as a company town with houses, a hospital, a school, and a church, all built because the coal here was worth digging. When the mine shut, most people left fast, but many buildings stayed, like an empty film set. Brazeau Collieries sits up the hill, the industrial core that outlasted everyone who worked it. The plant, powerhouse, and main buildings still stand almost exactly as on the last workday. Most old sites get stripped or torn down, but this one stayed nearly whole. The machinery sits where it stopped, frozen at the moment the work ended. South of it, the mountains keep rising, while the crowds thin out fast into Kananaskis country. National park views fill this place, with almost none of the crowds. Whole valleys hold glaciers, lakes and big animals you'd queue to see elsewhere, yet many trails feel like local secrets. Maps draw a hard border with the famous parks, but the mountains just keep going, while most tour buses turn back. Quiet campgrounds and calm lakes sit in terrain that would be packed with cars and lenses. All this open space leaves room for predators that disappeared from busier parks long ago, including the grizzly bear. One set of claw marks on a tree can belong to a bear whose home ground is bigger than a city. All year, it walks the same loop, from low rivers in spring to high berry slopes in summer. This top predator actually eats more roots and berries than meat, yet every dig still reworks the ground. A flipped log feeds birds with insects, and one deep hole can fill with rain into a tiny pool for other animals. Cubs get only a few seasons to learn the safe crossings and dangerous valleys before their mother drives them off. Lose one bear, and its trails and its rough digging vanish with it, loosening the balance of plants and prey. For now, this one keeps moving, fur dusted with seeds and claws on stone, as if the whole range belongs to it. This is the Canadian Rockies, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of North Dakota, check out this video.